The question, why did Hitler hate Jews, is one historians have studied extensively. The answer is complex, rooted in centuries of European antisemitism, specific historical circumstances, and Hitler's own psychological development. Before we can understand Hitler's personal antisemitism, we must understand that he did not invent hatred of Jews. Antisemitism, hostility toward or prejudice against Jewish people, had existed in Europe for centuries before Hitler was born in 1889. Medieval Europe saw Jews blamed for the Black Death plague, falsely accused of ritual murders, and forced to live in segregated areas called ghettos. Religious antisemitism portrayed Jews as Christ killers and enemies of Christianity. Economic antisemitism resented Jewish people for occupations they were forced into, such as money lending, which Christians were prohibited from engaging in by church law. By the 19th century, a new form of antisemitism emerged: racial antisemitism. Unlike religious antisemitism, which targeted Jews for their faith, racial antisemitism falsely claimed Jews were an inferior race that threatened other peoples biologically. This pseudo-scientific racism would become central to Nazi ideology. In German-speaking Europe, where Hitler grew up, anti-Semitic political movements gained strength in the late 1800s. Politicians discovered they could win votes by blaming Jews for economic problems, political instability, and social changes. Anti-Semitic newspapers, pamphlets, and books circulated widely. So, when Hitler began developing his worldview as a young man, he was entering a society where anti-Semitic ideas were already mainstream in certain circles. The question isn't why anti-Semitism existed, but rather how and when Hitler adopted these beliefs and why he took them to such genocidal extremes.
Adolf Hitler was born on April 20, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, Austria, a small town on the German-Austrian border. His father, Alois, was a stern customs official. His mother, Clara, was much younger than his father and apparently more affectionate toward young Adolf. There is a persistent myth that Hitler's grandfather was Jewish. This is completely false. There is no evidence whatsoever to support this claim. Historians have thoroughly investigated Hitler's family background and found no Jewish ancestry. Hitler's childhood was relatively ordinary for the time and place. He attended school, though he was not a particularly good student. He clashed with his father, who wanted him to enter the civil service, while young Adolf dreamed of becoming an artist. When Hitler was 17, his mother died of breast cancer. Her doctor, Edward Bloch, was Jewish. Far from hating Dr. Bloch, Hitler expressed gratitude for his care of his mother. Years later, after Germany annexed Austria, Hitler made special arrangements to protect Dr. Bloch and his wife from Nazi persecution. This fact is important. It shows that Hitler did not necessarily have deep anti-Semitic feelings in his youth. After his mother's death, Hitler moved to Vienna, the cosmopolitan capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He hoped to study art at the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts. He was rejected twice. The rejection devastated him. In his later autobiographical work, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, written while imprisoned after a failed coup attempt in 1923, Hitler claimed that Vienna was where he became an anti-Semite. He portrayed his conversion to anti-Semitism as the result of a long personal journey of discovery, claiming he gradually came to see Jews as a threat to German society. However, most historians now believe Hitler was lying or exaggerating about when and how he became anti-Semitic. This is critically important to understand. Hitler wrote Mein Kampf as propaganda, not as an honest autobiography. He was trying to make his extreme beliefs seem like the natural conclusion of careful observation, when in reality his anti-Semitism likely developed later and for different reasons. So, what do we actually know about Hitler's Vienna years? We know that Vienna had a large Jewish population, about 10% of the city. The city's mayor, Karl Lueger, was openly anti-Semitic and used anti-Jewish rhetoric to win elections. Anti-Semitic newspapers and pamphlets circulated widely. Hitler lived in poverty after his inheritance ran out, staying in homeless shelters. One of Hitler's most loyal buyers of his paintings was a Jewish art dealer named Samuel Morgenstern. Hitler socialized with Jewish acquaintances and had no documented conflicts with Jewish people during this period. Historian Ian Kershaw, one of the leading Hitler biographers, argues that while Hitler was certainly exposed to anti-Semitic ideas in Vienna, the evidence suggests he did not yet have a fully formed anti-Semitic ideology. He may have absorbed some prejudices, but he wasn't yet the fanatical anti-Semite he would become. Two Austrian politicians did influence Hitler's thinking during this period. Georg Ritter von Schönerer was a German nationalist who believed German-speaking parts of Austria should join Germany. He promoted the idea that Jews could never be true German citizens, a concept of racial, not religious, exclusion. Karl Lueger, Vienna's mayor, showed Hitler how anti-Semitism could be politically successful. Lueger mixed anti-Semitic rhetoric with popular social reforms, winning election after election. In Mein Kampf, Hitler called Lueger the greatest German mayor of all times. But even with this exposure, Hitler's Jewish acquaintances and business relationships during the Vienna years suggest his anti-Semitism had not yet crystallized into the murderous hatred it would become. So, if Vienna wasn't where Hitler truly became a radical anti-Semite, what was?
In May 1913, Hitler left Vienna and moved to Munich, Germany. When World War I broke out in August 1914, he volunteered for the German army, despite being an Austrian citizen. He served as a dispatch runner on the Western Front, a dangerous job, carrying messages between command posts and frontline trenches. Hitler was, by most accounts, a dedicated soldier. He was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class in 1914 and the Iron Cross First Class in 1918, a rare honor for someone of his low rank. His commanders noted his bravery, but also his odd, intense personality. He had few close friends among his fellow soldiers. On October 13, 1918, just weeks before the war ended, Hitler was temporarily blinded by a British gas attack near Ypres. He was in a military hospital recovering when Germany surrendered on November 11, 1918. The news of Germany's surrender devastated Hitler. Like many German soldiers, he could not understand how Germany had lost. The German army still occupied foreign territory. No enemy soldiers stood on German soil. How could Germany have been defeated? This confusion and anger would become the foundation for Hitler's radicalized anti-Semitism. In the chaotic aftermath of Germany's defeat, a dangerous conspiracy theory took hold, the stab-in-the-back myth, Dolchstoßlegende in German. According to this false narrative, Germany's army had not been defeated on the battlefield. Instead, the nation had been stabbed in the back by traitors on the home front, particularly socialists, communists, and Jews, who would undermine the war effort and force Germany to surrender. The myth was promoted by Germany's own military leadership to avoid taking responsibility for their strategic failures. On November 18, 1919, Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg testified before a parliamentary committee investigating Germany's defeat. He claimed Germany lost because the home front had failed to support the army adequately. He quoted an English general as saying the German army had been stabbed in the back. This was a lie. Germany had been thoroughly defeated militarily. By autumn 1918, German forces were in full retreat on all fronts. American troops were arriving by the hundreds of thousands. Germany's allies, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire had collapsed. The German economy was starving due to the Allied naval blockade. German soldiers were deserting in massive numbers. The war was lost. But the stab-in-the-back myth provided a psychologically satisfying alternative explanation. Instead of accepting that Germany had been militarily defeated, believers could claim the nation had been betrayed by internal enemies. And who were these supposed traitors? The myth particularly targeted Jews. This targeting of Jews was both illogical and deeply unjust. Jewish Germans had served loyally in the German military. About 100,000 Jewish soldiers fought for Germany, and approximately 12,000 died in combat.
Jewish Germans were no more or less patriotic than other Germans. But anti-Semites ignored these facts. They pointed to a few prominent Jewish communists involved in revolutionary movements at the war's end as proof of a Jewish conspiracy. Rosa Luxemburg, a Jewish woman who co-led the Spartacist communist uprising in January 1919, became a focal point for anti-Semitic propaganda, even though the vast majority of German Jews were not communists and many opposed the revolution. The prominence of some Jewish individuals in the new Weimar Republic government also fed anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Walter Rathenau, the Jewish businessman who served as foreign minister, was assassinated by right-wing extremists in 1922. Into this toxic environment of defeat, economic collapse, political instability, and conspiracy theories stepped Adolf Hitler. After his release from the hospital, Hitler remained in the army and returned to Munich. The city was in chaos. Bavaria had briefly been a communist republic before right-wing forces violently crushed the revolution. The streets were filled with bitter veterans, political extremists of all kinds, and conspiracy theories. The German army, suspicious of the new democratic government, assigned Hitler to investigate political groups. His job was to attend meetings and report on potentially subversive organizations. In September 1919, Hitler attended a meeting of the German Workers' Party, Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, or DAP, a tiny nationalist group. He joined the party, becoming its 55th member. Within months, he had become its most effective speaker and propagandist. It was during this period, 1919 to 1920, that Hitler's anti-Semitism became truly radical and murderous. The earliest documented evidence of Hitler's extreme anti-Semitism comes from a letter he wrote in September 1919, just after joining the DAP. In this letter, Hitler called for the removal of Jews from German society through an anti-Semitism of reason, not emotional violence. This was chillingly calculating. Hitler was already thinking in terms of systematic, organized elimination of Jews, not just discrimination or persecution. By August 1920, Hitler was comparing Jews to disease germs in his speeches. He argued that just as you must destroy the causes of disease, you must remove Jews from society to eliminate their supposed harmful influence. These ideas, that Jews were biologically dangerous, that they represented an existential threat to Germany, that they must be systematically removed, would eventually evolve into the Holocaust. But why did Hitler fixate on Jews as the explanation for everything he believed was wrong with the world? Several factors combined. The stab in the back myth. Hitler completely believed Germany had been betrayed from within. Anti-Semitic propaganda blamed Jews for this supposed betrayal. For Hitler, this explained Germany's shocking defeat. The association of Jews with communism. Some prominent communist leaders were Jewish, though the vast majority of Jews were not communists. Hitler developed an obsessive fear of communism, which he called Jewish Bolshevism. He saw communism as a Jewish invention designed to destroy nations. Economic scapegoating. The Weimar Republic faced catastrophic economic problems, including hyperinflation in 1923. Anti-Semitic propaganda blamed Jewish bankers and business people for economic hardship, despite Jews making up less than 1% of Germany's population. The conspiracy theory of Jewish world domination. Hitler absorbed the ideas from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a forged document supposedly containing Jewish plans for world conquest. The Protocols had been exposed as a fraud in 1921, but Hitler and other anti-Semites continued to believe it or find it useful for propaganda. Racial ideology. Hitler embraced pseudoscientific racial theories that divided humanity into superior and inferior races. He placed Aryans, by which he meant Germanic peoples, at the top and Jews at the bottom. This racial worldview portrayed history as a struggle between races for survival. A unified explanation for all problems. Perhaps most importantly, anti-Semitism gave Hitler a simple, unified explanation for everything he thought was wrong.
Germany lost the war, Jews betrayed the nation. Economic problems, Jewish conspiracy. Political instability, Jewish communists. Cultural changes he disliked, Jewish influence. This is how conspiracy theories function psychologically. They provide simple answers to complex problems by blaming a single group for everything. Hitler's anti-Semitism was also useful politically. By 1920, he had discovered he was a gifted public speaker. His speeches attacking Jews, communists, and the Weimar government drew large, enthusiastic crowds. Anti-Semitism helped him build a political movement. By 1933, when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, his anti-Semitic worldview was fully formed. Jews were, in his view, racial enemies who must be eliminated from German society. What began as discrimination and persecution would escalate through a series of increasingly radical measures into the systematic murder of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust.
Once Hitler gained power in January 1933, his anti-Semitic ideology quickly translated into policy. The persecution escalated in stages. 1933–1935, legal discrimination. The Nazis began with boycotts of Jewish businesses, book burnings of works by Jewish authors, and laws excluding Jews from the civil service and professions. 1935, the Nuremberg Laws. These laws stripped Jews of German citizenship and prohibited marriage between Jews and non-Jews. They legally defined who was considered Jewish based on ancestry, not religion, implementing Hitler's racial view of anti-Semitism. 1938, Kristallnacht. On November 9 to 10, 1938, the Nazis organized massive pogroms across Germany and Austria. Synagogues were burned, Jewish-owned stores were destroyed, and thousands of Jewish men were sent to concentration camps. This marked a transition from legal persecution to open violence. 1939 to 1941, ghettoization and mobile killing units. After Germany invaded Poland in 1939 and the Soviet Union in 1941, Jews in occupied territories were forced into ghettos. Mobile killing squads called Einsatzgruppen followed the German army into Soviet territory, shooting over 1 million Jews in mass executions. 1942 to 1945, the final solution. At the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, Nazi leaders formalized plans for the systematic murder of all European Jews. This led to the industrialized killing in extermination camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor. 6 million Jews were murdered, 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population. This progression from prejudice to discrimination to persecution to genocide shows how dangerous anti-Semitism became when combined with state power and a leader who genuinely believed Jews were an existential threat.
While understanding Hitler's personal anti-Semitism is important, we must also understand that the Holocaust required far more than one man's hatred. The Holocaust happened because centuries of European anti-Semitism created a cultural environment where anti-Jewish prejudice was normalized and widespread. The specific crisis of post-W1 Germany, defeat, economic collapse, political instability, created conditions where extremism could flourish and conspiracy theories could gain traction. Propaganda and indoctrination spread Hitler's anti-Semitic ideology throughout German society, especially through control of education and media. Thousands of perpetrators actively participated in the genocide, not just top Nazi leaders, but also ordinary soldiers, police, bureaucrats, and civilians who carried out orders, informed on neighbors, or looked away. Institutional complicity from government ministries, the military, industry, and even religious institutions enabled the systematic nature of the killings. International failure to intervene allowed the genocide to continue. While some individuals and groups tried to rescue Jews, Allied governments did not prioritize stopping the Holocaust during the war. Hitler's anti-Semitism was the ideological core of the Holocaust, but its implementation required a society that had been prepared by centuries of prejudice, traumatized by recent crisis, and then systematically indoctrinated to accept or participate in genocide. Understanding how Hitler developed his murderous antisemitism matters for several critical reasons. 1. Recognizing warning signs. By understanding how conspiracy theories, scapegoating, and dehumanizing rhetoric can escalate to violence, we can better recognize similar patterns in our own time. When political movements blame a single group for all of society's problems, when conspiracy theories spread unchallenged, when people are dehumanized based on their religion or ethnicity, these are warning signs. 2. Understanding that genocide doesn't happen overnight. The Holocaust resulted from a gradual escalation over 12 years, from discrimination to persecution to murder. At each stage, there were choices made and opportunities missed to intervene. Understanding this progression helps us recognize that preventing genocide requires early action, not waiting until violence begins. 3. Combating antisemitism today. Antisemitism did not end with Hitler's death. It continues in various forms, from conspiracy theories blaming Jews for world events, to Holocaust denial, to violent attacks on Jewish communities. Understanding the historical roots and consequences of antisemitism is essential to fighting it today. 4. Valuing truth over propaganda. Hitler's own account of how he became anti-Semitic was propaganda designed to make his hatred appear rational. Learning to distinguish historical evidence from propaganda narratives is crucial in our current era of misinformation. 5. The danger of dehumanization. At the core of Hitler's antisemitism was the belief that Jews were not fully human, that they were dangerous vermin or disease. This dehumanization made genocide psychologically possible for perpetrators. We must guard against all forms of dehumanization based on religion, ethnicity, or other group characteristics. So, why did Hitler hate Jews? The historical evidence suggests he likely did not have deep anti-Semitic convictions in his youth, despite what he later claimed. His anti-Semitism crystallized after World War I, influenced by the stab-in-the-back myth, conspiracy theories, and the chaotic political environment of post-war Germany. He embraced anti-Semitism as both a personal explanation for Germany's problems and a politically useful tool for building a movement. His hatred was not just emotional, but ideological. He genuinely believed Jews represented an existential racial threat to Germany. This ideology, combined with his eventual absolute power and a society prepared by centuries of prejudice, led to the Holocaust. But the larger truth is this: Hitler's personal anti-Semitism matters less than what society allowed him to do with it. The Holocaust happened not because one man hated Jews, but because a society failed to reject his hatred, failed to defend its Jewish neighbors, and ultimately participated in or tolerated industrialized murder. The memorial at Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Center, is named Hall of Names. It contains the names and photographs of Holocaust victims, millions of individuals, each with their own story, their own family, their own dreams. When we ask, why did Hitler hate Jews, we must remember that his hatred had consequences for millions of real people. Their memory demands that we never forget what happened, actively combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred, defend democratic institutions and human rights, question conspiracy theories and propaganda, stand up for vulnerable communities, educate ourselves and others about this history. The Holocaust survivor and author Elie Wiesel wrote, "For the dead and the living, we must bear witness." Understanding how Hitler's anti-Semitism developed and how it led to genocide is part of bearing witness, and part of our responsibility to ensure it never happens again.